Hi, I'm Jeremy, the Zoo Nerd, coming to you live from my backyard in Los Angeles, California. How's everyone doing today? I hope you're well, happy, healthy, staying safe, and having some fun. Today in Critter Chat, we're going to talk about an animal that most people are familiar with, as they are fairly common throughout many parts of the world. Today we're going to talk about swans. Swans are the largest of waterfowl. So waterfowl also includes ducks and geese. Swans are way bigger than either of those. They live in both North America and South America, Europe, Asia, and Australia, and New Zealand. They do not live in Africa, nor in Antarctica. Most scientists agree that there are 7 species of swans. Earlier today, in the pictures I posted on Facebook and Instagram, those are 3 different species. So picture number 1 is trumpeter swans. That photo was specifically taken at the Los Angeles Zoo, where those swans live. The second picture is a black swan. Black swans, that photo was taken at the Santa Barbara Zoo here in California. And then the third photo is a mute swan. Mute swans don't make as much noise as the others. That's how they got their name. And the mute swan photo was taken in Denmark. So that is a wild bird, actually in the sea, in the salt water. So they sometimes hang out in salt water, sometimes in fresh water. I'm going to go through and talk a little bit about the different species. They kind of have similar looks. Some of them are very difficult to tell apart. Some of them are pretty easy. So going back to start with the trumpeter swans, they are native to North America. Specifically, they can be found today in the western US and western Canada. Traditionally, they lived all over North America, but unfortunately, the early settlers in America were hungry, and they hunted and ate most of the swans almost to extinction for the trumpeter swan. They ate and most of them in the eastern United States, to where they don't really exist back there anymore. There are some other swan species that sometimes are seen there, and we'll talk about those as we go through. But at one time, trumpeter swans were seriously endangered, but today they are doing much, much better. They are largely considered the largest of swan species by size, not by weight. They have an all black bill, so it's totally black. The rest of their body is white. And they have an 8-foot wingspan, so they're absolutely huge when they're flying. A male trumpeter swan is usually a little heavier than the female swan, and they can weigh anywhere between 15 and up to 30 pounds. So they are definitely a very large bird as far as flying birds go. The second photo is a black swan. Black swans live in Australia. They've been introduced into many parts of the world because they are strikingly beautiful. So they have since been introduced into New Zealand, where they did not live on their own originally, but now they have a huge population there. They've also been introduced into Europe, Japan, and Singapore, where there are now wild populations of that species. Black swans are also listed as least concern, so there's a healthy population of them. And it was noted that black swans have 25 vertebrae in their neck. Those are the neck bones. Humans only have 7. Giraffes also only have 7. Swans have 25. So that's how their necks can bend so much. And black swans have the longest neck in relation to their body size. They have a 6-foot wingspan. They can weigh about 20 pounds. And they have that very bright red bill, contrasting against their black body. Mute swans, that's the third photo that I posted earlier today. They are native to Europe and parts of Asia, but they have been introduced to a lot of areas in the United States and even around the world. They are kind of regarded as the fairy tale swan. They're the one that's like most pictured as a symbol of love and grace and beauty and all those great things we associate with swans. The mute swan is the ideal looking swan. Mute swans can actually be the heaviest of all swans. They have a bigger body, and a male mute swan can weigh almost 50 pounds, making them one of the heaviest flying birds in the world. They have a very signature bill. Their bill is kind of orange color, with black near the top of it, where it connects to its face right under their eyes. The fourth kind of swan we're going to talk about is called the tundra swan. These swans live in North America, up in Alaska and a little bit into Canada, and they are there during their breeding season, which is the spring and summer, and then they migrate. And it's really interesting. I will share some data later today on Facebook that shows the migratory patterns, because they live, most of them kind of hang out in Alaska for most of their summertime, and the swans that live further north at the top of Alaska, they migrate to the east coast of the United States, kind of like the Great Lakes area, Chesapeake Bay, kind of down through the Carolinas, and that's kind of where they spend their winter. The swans that nest kind of on the western part of Alaska come down to the west coast, and they fly inland over parts of Canada and even down through like the Rocky Mountain states like Montana, Idaho, Utah, and then they turn and then they go and winter over in Northern California and Southern Oregon. Tundra swans are also called whistling swans, not because of a noise they make vocally, but because of their wings. When they flap, they make a whistling sound. They are also good-sized birds. They can weigh up to 23 pounds. They have a 5.5-foot wingspan, and they have yellow at the base of an all-black bill. One thing that's really crazy about the tundra swans is they hold the world record for having the most feathers of any bird. So somebody counted, and they have over 25,000 feathers on their body, which makes sense because they do nest in a very, very cold area of the world where it can still be snowy and cold even in the summertime there up in Alaska. Next, we're going to talk about black-necked swans. Black-necked swans are incredibly gorgeous. They have a white body, and then where their neck attaches to the body through their head is black. So it almost looks like they dipped their head in ink or paint, and they have a very striking appearance. They are also listed as least concern, and they live in the southern half of South America. They're pretty good size with a 6-foot wingspan. They weigh between 9 and 12 pounds. They have pink feet, and they have a red carnacle, which is kind of this fleshy, blobby part that's right on top of their bill. They have also been clocked in flight at 50 miles an hour, making them one of the fastest of all waterfowl. All swans are pretty fast in flight once they get going. They all kind of struggle to take off because they usually take off from the water. So they kind of take a bit to get airborne and fly. Next, we're going to talk about the smallest swan species, which is called the coast cobra swan. They're quite a bit smaller than the others. They weigh between 8 and 12 pounds. They have a 5-foot wingspan, and they also live in South America. They also have a... Sorry about that. I had a call come through that interrupted the video feed. Hopefully we're back now. Our final swan species is called the whooper swan. Whooper swans live in Northern Europe and in Asia. They typically nest in Siberia in Russia, and then come further south during the winter time. They are also a very large swan, almost as big as trumpeter swans or mute swans, and they have a mostly yellow bill with black right on the edge of it. Now, with all of these swans, I'm happy to report they are listed as least concern now. So none of them are endangered anymore, although, like I mentioned earlier, the trumpeter swans at one time were, and they're still needing some help we'll talk about that in just a moment. All swans love the same kind of habitat, which is a wetlands habitat. Some people sometimes, wetlands can be like swampy areas. Wetlands can also be lakes, rivers, and streams. So it's kind of any of those spaces. They need water though. They love to eat aquatic plants. That's most of their food. They usually spend most of their time floating on water. They dip their necks under the water to eat. Sometimes they'll kind of put their butt up in the air as they're eating to reach down deeper into the bottom of the lake to eat the plants. They usually need shallow water to eat. They will also eat some things like snails, sometimes little fish, or other shelled animals that may live in the water source, and then also insects. And occasionally they've been known to land in a field where farmers have been growing grain, things like wheat or corn, and they'll eat that. In some places that has caused some problems, and sometimes people get annoyed with swans. When they make a nest, they usually make a nest out of plant material near the water. So reeds, grasses, sometimes some moss, sometimes sticks. They make a nest pretty secluded, sometimes on a little island if there is one in the body of water where they're nesting. And during their nesting season, which is usually the springtime, they become very territorial and they don't allow other swans near them. For most like decent sized lakes, like if it's a lake in a park, usually only one pair of swans can live on that lake if they're going to be nesting. So we don't usually see a bunch of swans together because they're more social in their further north range, and they're not typically found in a lot of places in big groups if they're going to be breeding. So they typically are in bigger groups when they migrate, if they fly far distances, but not if they're nesting. They need their own space. They will lay anywhere between 5 and up to as many as 12 eggs. Usually it's kind of more in the middle, kind of in that 6 or 8 egg range. And after about 30 to 32 days, the eggs hatch. They're also really big eggs. Swans have some of the biggest eggs for flying birds of any of the flying birds. So they're probably like 2 to 3 times the size of a chicken egg, depending on the species of swan. Usually just the female sits on the eggs. In some of the species, the male helps out with incubating a little bit. In the others, he just stands guard and he will chase away any and everything that comes near. He'll chase away other birds like ducks and geese. He'll chase away any mammals that may be in the area, things like otters or beavers or deer, people. When they are nesting and when they have goslings, cygnets. Cygnets are baby swans. They become super, super aggressive. And they will chase, they will nip, they will beat you with their wings. They become very, very aggressive, and they are not the peaceful, demure creatures we often picture them as. The parents are very protective after the babies hatch, and the babies can usually swim and walk within a couple of hours. They'll typically all hatch within a couple hours of each other, and then they sometimes will ride on their mom's or their dad's back out onto the water, but they will also be able to swim on their own within a few hours. And then, like I said, the parents will become very protective. They take a while to grow up. So with most birds, they're usually able to reproduce by the time they're like on their first birthday. With swans, it's actually more 2 to even 4 years before they're able to pair up and reproduce, which is quite a bit longer than, say, like ducks and geese, which are very closely related to them. Swans, it takes quite a while. But once they're about 4 years old and they're looking for a mate, they usually will find a mate that they'll choose for life. Now, sometimes in those early years, they figure out that it's not working and they'll keep trying to find the right one. And it may take a couple of seasons till they get the right mate. But then once they do, they're usually with that bird the rest of their life. Because of that, they are definitely a symbol of love, and we all get like warm, twittery feelings when we see swans because they're beautiful and they symbolize love. Their vocalizations are varying depending on the species. The mute swans don't make as much noise. The others can kind of make honking sounds. They make hissing sounds. Any of them can hiss at you when they are defending themselves. And some of them are very noisy when they fly. Particularly, most swans spend most of their time on the water. They have kind of a hard time walking on land. Their feet are kind of positioned really far back, and their body cavity is pretty heavy. So they're kind of a little lopsided in walking, and they look really awkward on land. So they usually spend a lot of time on the water because they're more comfortable there. And on the water, they are also very fast swimmers. They can move very quickly, as well as in flight. They are very fast flyers. They typically, like I said, are very territorial during breeding season and more social during the winter months when they don't have babies to look after. In the wild, most species of swans can live into their teens or maybe in their 20s. Some of the bigger species can live into their 30s or maybe even 40s in a zoo setting where they're not having to fly a big far distance and where they're not worried about predators or defending their babies as much. Threats to swans on a global basis are very similar. One is habitat loss. The wetlands are areas that people like to manipulate. That's water that we might take to use for growing crops or for people uses like to drink, to use as watering golf courses, also sorts of things that we take water out of naturally occurring systems. We dam rivers, we make lakes. Lakes are usually too deep for swans to feed, except for right around the edges. So it can cause real problems for them as habitat loss. Also, some places they drain the wetlands and then try to build things over it, like golf courses or neighborhoods or shopping centers. And all of those things have negative impacts on swans. In addition to that, pollution. Water pollution is a huge issue globally, and pollution causes lots of problems for all animals who live in an aquatic environment. Swans are certainly affected by that as well. In addition to that, things like climate change and rising sea levels can also impact swans' environments. As some of those coastal wetlands get flooded with seawater, that changes what kind of plants can grow in that area. Some swans can do fine in salty water, some swans cannot. So it kind of depends on the species and where they're living and what they're doing. With the United States, we have some problems with both water pollution and habitat loss, and we had really strict laws put in place that protected our environment, and the current federal administration is trying to diminish those and take those away. Recent suggested rollbacks for that are kind of being disputed and debated in politics right now. And so since this is an election year in the United States, I would highly encourage you to choose candidates across the ballot, everybody from your city council up to the President of the United States, people who are going to protect environments and limit the environmental impact that businesses and developers and industry and oil pipelines and all those things can have on the environment, so that we can protect places that nature needs, places where swans and other animals need. Our special shout out today is an organization called the Trumpeter Swan Society. I mentioned at the beginning that trumpeter swans were at one point very rare in the US. In 1935, they did a census of trumpeter swans. That was quite a while ago, right? That was 85 years ago. There were less than 100 trumpeter swans in the whole United States. And that was largely because people had hunted them almost to extinction. And after that happened, people started to become a little more concerned about them. And the Trumpeter Swan Society was actually established in 1968 They just celebrated their 50th anniversary not too long ago and have been doing a lot of really great work trying to help out the swans. In addition to that, during that time when there weren't a lot of trumpeter swans around, mute swans were brought in from Europe and put on places like golf courses and city parks, especially heavily in the eastern United States. And now the mute swan, which is kind of an invasive species in the US, has taken over a lot of that habitat and range. And so trumpeter swans aren't as prevalent as they once were in the eastern portion of the United States and Canada. There are some other organizations working to help out trumpeter swans, including many zoos. The LA Zoo, like I mentioned, is where the picture of the trumpeter swans were, that's picture number 1 on today, were photographed, and those 2 swans are approved that if they breed and have babies, it's possible that those babies could be released out into the wild to help further the trumpeter swan population in North America. There are many other zoos that do that, and many zoos have like a pair of swans on their pond or lake that they're trying to have trumpeter swans so that they can bolster our native swan population instead of the fairy tale swan that we imported from Europe. My experience with swans is a little limited. I have seen and dealt with some swans in zoo settings. At the Phoenix Zoo, we had coast cobra swans, which are the smallest ones from South America. They lived in an exhibit with our flamingos, which were also South American flamingos. They got along really well. And coast cobra swans are probably the nicest of all swans. Although I never had direct contact with them, I did see them at times, and they never seemed to act too aggressively towards the other animals, including the flamingos. And when the flamingos had chicks, the swans were pretty cool with it. Now, the flamingos were not always very cool. They were a little snippy with the swans when they had chicks around. At the LA Zoo, we had trumpeter swans at the end of my time there, but we actually had black-necked swans during the beginning of my time at the LA Zoo, and I worked a bit with both species, although just rarely, and just was as I was training to be a zookeeper there. Although once I was a zookeeper, I would walk by the trumpeter swans almost every day, so I got to see them very, very often. And they were often very cranky. They loved to get their food first thing in the morning, and they recognized a zookeeper uniform as someone who could potentially give them food. As being one of the people that had fed them on occasion, they, I think, specifically recognized me as, hey, that's that guy who fed us a couple times. Let's bug him for food. And they would often come honking and swimming over to the edge of their exhibit as I would walk by in the quiet hours of the morning. And they were pretty excited to get their food. So swans are very cool. They're very beautiful. They are not as peaceful nor as nice as people think that they often are. So I would encourage you, although you may enjoy watching swans, please give them some space. If they have babies with them, give them some extra space because they will become very, very protective. And if they feel threatened, usually one parent, the mom, takes the babies one way and the dad will attack the invader. So be careful. Although they're a bird and they don't have big sharp teeth or claws, they can hurt you. And a wing from a swan can do some serious damage. It can break some bones. It can poke some eyes out. So be very, very careful. Don't get close to them. All right, that is what I have to say about swans today. I'll be posting some more information and videos on the Facebook page, so feel free to check those out, as well as any of my content on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, or on my website at jeremythezooner.com. Feel free to like, share, follow, and subscribe. And until tomorrow, be happy, be healthy, have fun, stay safe. Bye.